All right, we'll go ahead and get started now. And as you can hear probably in the background, here are the dangers of working at home. The alarm is going off in the background every Tuesday at 10 a.m. I forgot about that schedule. Anyways, thank you for joining. And what we're here to talk about today is the Industry 4.0 Opportunity Assessment Workshop, an introduction to the process and sample results that we run as Visual Decisions. Thank you for joining us today, and hopefully it'll be informative for you. So just as an overview of what we're going to talk about, first want to go through workshop overview, talk about the purpose of it, the scope that we typically look at, the typical agenda, the deliverables, and timeline, and then walk through some of the example deliverables that we've done for other customers. So for digital transformation industry 4.0, what you have to have is a good grounding in where you are today. And as we look to put one of these workshops together, what we're looking to do is to define not only just the diagnostic itself, but also what that business case looks like and a blueprint for how to achieve the goals that you're laying out in that business case. So the opportunity itself is a diagnostic where we go through and do a very deep dive on what are the process impediments that exist today, what is the state of digital readiness within the company, and really how business is going to be done differently tomorrow than it is today. The example that I use all the time is a Fitbit. I've been wearing a Fitbit for a number of years now, and it really hasn't helped me lose weight. It's not because the Fitbit itself is broken or not working. The Fitbit works just fine. The problem is that I haven't changed my behaviors. And it's the same thing with any systems that you put out on the manufacturing shop floor. Anything that you do around Industry 4.0 won't have the impact that you're hoping it will unless people fundamentally do something differently tomorrow. And so part of what we look at is not only the technologies that will be able to help, but also from a vendor agnostic perspective, I should say, but also then what are the process changes that you'll have to make to be able to take advantage of those. So some of the value of the workshops, you should come out of it with a clear, concise vision of what you're trying to achieve with Industry 4.0, agreement of where you are today and where you want to be in the future, getting alignment from the different levels of the business and the different functions of the business is very important. And being able to have that agreement in what is that path forward, what is that vision, is critical to the success of the project. Then the roadmap itself and how that business case is going to be realized in the future is obviously also extremely critical. So some of the different assessment areas, some of the scope that we can look at, the methods that are in place today, the systems and the tools, the processes, the KPIs, and also the organizational readiness itself. And within each one of those different categories, we have developed a very, very large matrix for scoring what are the current levels of capabilities in those different areas across different industries, really. And being able to then tie that into what are the goals of the business. So understanding what that business strategy looks like at the top level, understanding what are some of these areas where you may not have the capabilities that you want, what are those root causes of process performance that you have today, and then being able to link those to the enablers that Industry 4.0 can provide. So that leads me into really what is at the heart of the assessment, which is the business case. And the reason that we put the business case at the center of everything is that as you're going through and doing one of these analyses, everything needs to be based on the dollars. If the dollar return isn't there, why do it as a business? And so we start with what are those top level business goals. We drive that down through what are the kind of proximate impediments to the increased performance, and then drill that as much as possible down to the root causes through the analysis of those different things that we just talked about. Once we have those root causes identified, or at least as close to the root causes as we can come, what we can start to do then is to look at what are the different aspects of Industry 4.0 that might be beneficial for the company. And what are the things that could fundamentally change in terms of the process itself. And so it's not only identifying the different pieces of technology that can come with Industry 4.0 that can be applied within the organization, it's also identifying what is the additional training? How do we change the culture around these things? How do we drive a digital culture and a data-driven culture? How do we actually adapt the process? Something as simple as a shift stand-up meeting out on the shop floor. How do you take advantage of these new capabilities that come along with Industry 4.0 so that you're not just doing the same shift handoffs that you've done in the past? How do you change your quality organization so that the quality organization has both access to and understands how to utilize the different data that's coming from these very detailed systems on the shop floor? So those are the different types of things that we look at with this assessment, and that's really why it forms kind of the core of what we're doing. Because for us, the business case not only includes what is a top level estimate, but it also includes what is that actual plan for how we're going to realize that benefit. All that being said, the fundamental process that we go through is this set of steps, much of which can be done off-site before we get started. So working with the team to define the assessment scope, identify the people that will be involved, the core team, looking at the available data that can be passed to us beforehand, formulating hypotheses from that available data. And once we are in a good spot with where we can be before we get to the facilities, then we'll get to the we'll get on site, we'll walk the process, we'll conduct interviews with the teams, and really then we go through an iterative loop where, as we're walking the process, conducting interviews, we're going to find things that we didn't see in the data that was shared beforehand. And so we'll try to go back and request additional data. We'll refine the different hypotheses or change them entirely based on the additional things that we find. And we'll go through that feedback loop throughout the week or however long we're on site. And then once we leave, we'll start to develop the diagnostic document, and honestly, that becomes an iterative loop itself with the core team at your companies. And then we'll present the findings in a formal basis to the entire team, including the leadership team. So that's the fundamental process. I'll go through some of the details behind those different things reasonably quickly. So defining the assessment scope. Most of what we do is in operations, and so there's a very strong operations focus, whether that's safety, quality, delivery, cost, inventory, personnel, environmental sustainability, new product development and introduction, looking at the network level aspects on the IT aspects of the digital readiness within the facilities, the sourcing and procurement operations, demand planning and forecasting, production scheduling is another one, supply chain planning, customer and field service, and potentially more. It just depends on where the business really feels that this is required, that that is the problem areas where they want to look. The core team obviously depends on what we choose for the scope. And so depending on that scope, people from the core team could be coming from any of these different groups. So step 3 is identifying and analyzing the available data. And I'm not going to go through this whole list, but fundamentally what we want to understand are, what are the, existing capabilities of the business, what data can be delivered on a, reasonable basis, what is accessible to the people within the company, and, what is the data that they can utilize today to, make decisions with. And furthermore, what are the capabilities of those people to make those determinations? And so, as we go through here, we're trying to not only analyze, this, potential information, but also really look at what are the capabilities of the people within the organization to be able to perform these functions and, do these activities. So once we have some of that data, we're going to, comb through it. We're going to start formulating hypotheses for what those process impediments are, what the root causes are. We're going to go back and ask clarifying questions, may ask for additional data and so forth to be able to drill down into that. And what we really want to do is to get as close to root cause as we possibly can for whatever scope we're looking at. And so to do that, we want to be as data-driven as possible, but that's also something where a lot of times as we're going through this process with customers, we will have a lot of gray areas that are still undecided at the end of the step before we get to the plant. So then steps 5 and 6 is really when we're on site and we're walking the process. It's very helpful to walk the process multiple times. And so if we're in a plant, we'll want to walk the process with the plant manager to get what are the things that he looks at, what does he see when he walks the facility, all the way down to an operator or a supervisor, and talking with them and what is their view of the process. Going through it with process engineers, maintenance, controls people, quality, continuous improvement leads. All of them will have a different mindset, a different set of things that they look at when they walk through the plant or walk through the process. If we're looking at something like new product introduction. So being able to see that through the eyes of the different people that are involved is very important. Then we'll also be conducting interviews in more of a conference room setting with different people, and really going through a lot of those data elements that we looked at in steps 3 and 4, as well as some of the different hypotheses that we have, and kind of running through what is actually a process impediment, what is actually a root cause, refining those hypotheses as we go through this process, and really trying to loop through that as rapidly as possible to get to where we actually find what those are. So really, once we have all of that information, what we're going to do then is we're going to start usually in the evenings, as we go through these different days, putting together what are the linkages that we see between some of the strategic objectives and what are the details that are happening down within the facility, the data that we're seeing, the results from the interviews and so forth, and then tying that together with the financial statements, looking at the costs, the cost build-up structure and so forth, and trying to tie that together as much as possible. And then also finding the linkages between some of the different metrics, the KPIs. If you are a lean shop and you do policy deployment, then looking at how what are those different policies that are being driven down through the organization? How do you have those linkages defined? Looking at things like balanced scorecard if you're doing something more along those lines, and how people are measured within the organization, and are those KPIs that are being utilized, are those actually in alignment with what those strategies were on that previous page. So then we're going to start developing the documentation. We're going to document all of those assessment findings. We're going to lay out what the executive business case is, and then we'll start to document the blueprint and roadmap. And then we'll walk through those findings with both the core team as well as the extended team and the executive sponsorship. So that's essentially the process that we go through. So depending on the scope, that can take different lengths of time. So the first example that I'll walk through here is one where we were brought in by a venture firm to analyze the digital capabilities of potential purchase. It was a smaller organization that they wanted us to do a very broad survey on, but they didn't expect us to go tremendously deep in this organization. And so this is something where we were able to do things in advance. We were able to get on site, do this in 2 days, and then document our findings very rapidly after that. This was something where the venture firm wanted us to be able to turn this around very quickly. In the second example, where we'll go through what we created for a customer around their total cost of quality, that was something that took us 5 days on site and a significant amount of time before and afterwards to really drive through the additional details and so forth. So going through this first example, what we looked at was, as I said, very broad across sales, production, both the operations as well as some of the execution aspects of things, quality, shipping, and so forth, and really just documenting different findings that we saw, and where they were at with their current capabilities, what we felt that they needed to achieve in order to really improve the process as well. Some of the root causes that we identified, they were doing Excel-based management. As I said, this was a smaller organization, and we have found this to be true even in larger organizations also, where Excel is the primary management tool. And so there were a lot of different implications of that, and it really didn't help with the overall organization of the company. It didn't help with the organization of activities, I should say, within the company. And it certainly didn't help with the visibility of management to what was actually happening within the process. Looking at things going across different functions, if you're using Excel, it can be very difficult to keep cross-functional teams organized. Just for the reason that you end up with multiple different versions of the truth. Each team will tend to develop its own spreadsheet, and you get different people arguing about what the different measurements really should be, and then they calculate them in different ways, and 2/3 of the meeting is spent just arguing over what that data is as opposed to what you should be doing about the problems. Different process enablers that we looked at. The company was run basically off of QuickBooks and Salesforce and Excel. And so what we started to look at were different capabilities of pulling information directly from the process, utilizing an operational data store outside of the existing systems to very rapidly build up those capabilities and tie that into execution systems that we would build in either Click or Tableau or whatever the customer chose. All right, so that was a very small example, something we were able to do very quickly. This is a much more detailed example, and as I said, it took a longer period of time. We were on site for 5 days developing this, and it was really a couple of weeks worth of work beforehand and afterwards as well to pull all of the data together and really have all of the conversations that were required, as well as getting the information from finance that led to all of this. So just at that high level introduction again, this was really focused on quality, and so we looked at different aspects of quality, whether it was the materials coming from the suppliers, what was happening in fabrication, what was happening in assembly, customer service and field service, and then how did the research and development and the product development teams actually tie into what some of these issues were. And so I talked about this earlier in kind of the pyramid that was pointed down, and then the pyramid that was pointed up. And what we really do is we go through what we call a 6-block analysis. And at the top level, what we're doing is we're defining what is the overall value bucket that is available for this particular metric. And so in this case, we're looking at the total cost of quality. And the next step down is looking at what are those proximate impediments to the performance, and those could take a number of different shapes. Drilling that down into the root causes. I talked about our detailed scoring matrices that we have, and the lower right is an example of one of those where we go through and look at what is the current capability across a number of different metrics and down through number of different workflows. And we utilize this framework to be able to really drill into what capabilities should there be and what does exist today. So that helps us identify what those root causes are. And then we're going to build it up from the enablers to what are the new capabilities going to be, how is life going to be different tomorrow than it is today, and then hopefully build that up into some level of return on investment in this area. So just going through a more detailed example of this, I'm not going to read the whole slide for you, but looking at the total cost of quality, all the numbers are changed obviously from what we looked at with the customer, but at a total cost of quality here, what we look at is our internal cost of failure, our external cost, our appraisal cost, and our preventive cost. And we look at that, what it was in the year prior to the analysis, and then what we're projecting for the next 4 years here. I guess that's 5-year going forward, 2018 through 2022, and what it would be if they took no actions, to actually make any improvements. So then we look at what are those process impediments, and in this case, we looked at technology, different elements of the data that was not available, limited quality tools. There were also, as we'll see on some subsequent pages, limited capabilities in terms of the staff and the knowledge that they had. So drilling down from there, we got down into individual systems and really root level capabilities that were just lacking. We started to look from there into okay, for those different root causes, what can we put in place that will directly address those root causes? What are the capabilities that have to be present? What are the things that we can put in place that will be able to make those root causes go away? Whether that's from a training point of view, simple process change, different technologies that can be put in place and so forth. And then building that up into higher level capabilities that will be present, such as being able to really do a proper root cause analysis, being able to map out different flows within the process automatically, so that you can have a real-time value stream map, you can have a real-time FMEA that's continuously updated based on what's happening on the floor and so forth. And how that actually drives up into what we project to be the future cost of quality, and what would the savings be from what would the cost be if nothing was done versus what we feel that it would be with these changes. And so then we actually break down, we had this at the internal, external appraisal and preventive cost, and then we actually broke down for each one of those different areas what were the internal failure costs and what were the different categories within there, and did the same type of analysis at that lower level. And we did that for the internal, the external, the appraisal costs, and the preventive costs. And so, going through that really detailed analysis, this was just quality. We also worked with them to do this type of analysis on production throughput. What are the primary causes for downtime within the plant? We looked at different sourcing capabilities for them and so forth. And what we ended up on was that quality was the single biggest opportunity for that customer. So we took all of that and we created a phased implementation plan. And for our philosophy, the first step is always to look at the existing data, what do they have today, what can be utilized, and really how we can better leverage that existing information. And so, what are the things that can be done today in turn for process change, where the people can take the data that exists, get access to that data. A lot of times people aren't even aware what data is already out there, and put those additional capabilities in place. And we can do that while we're also implementing systems. So hopefully you can get leverage the existing things to drive immediate value, and then you can also in parallel be implementing systems to fill some of those gaps in capability that you have today, and really drive through that to integrating across processes, and eventually looking at much higher level capabilities being added to the business. So that is the basic process. I want to thank you for your time. If you have questions, please reach out to me at tim@visualdecisions.com, or give me a call at 630-957-8096. And I look forward to speaking with you. Thank you. Bye-bye.